Finally, here we are, last but not least. Concept 34.7 is all about the mammals. Mammals are amniotes that have hair and produce milk. There are about 5,300 species of mammals on Earth, which is not a very big number when you compare that to, say, the ray-finned fishes, which are by far the most common vertebrates, or if you go back to the insects, the arthropods, which far outnumber us. So while mammals are an important part of the world, they're definitely not the most numerous type of animal out there. I'm assuming you guys can hear the train in the background. I'm in a hotel room as I'm traveling. But so let's talk a little bit about mammals. Mammals have some certain characteristics that make them unique. They have hair at some portion, on some portion of their body. They produce milk, and they feed their young with milk produced by the female of the species. So let's take a look at the mammals. Here we are all the way down at the bottom at the most distinct sort of group here. So we've gone from sort of these bigger groupings all the way down to the bottom. Again, these are not the words that I want you to recognize or memorize. I want you to go back and look at the various groupings and what makes these different groupings unique. What are their derived characteristics? So what are the derived characters of mammals? What makes a mammal a mammal? Well, you can take a look. They have mammary glands, and the word mammary kind of indicates the word mammal. Mammary glands which produce milk. So the female of the species nourishes the young using milk produced by her body. They have hair. On some species the hair is not very evident, or it's fairly sparse, but it's going to be there somewhere. They have a very high metabolic rate due to endothermy. So they are warm-blooded creatures. They are endothermic, and they have a high metabolic rate. They are able to keep their temperature fairly steady no matter the external conditions. Large brain size, a larger brain than most other vertebrates of equivalent size, and they have a more developed jaw and set of teeth, differentiated teeth like molars and cuspids, some teeth for biting and chewing meat, and some teeth for grinding grain and grass and the like. Mammals evolved from a group of creatures called synapsids. Synapsids were the dominant tetrapod during the Permian, but most of them, or many of them, were wiped out during the Permian Triassic extinction event. Early mammals shared the earth with dinosaurs, but we were not the dominant species at all. I mean, the dinosaurs ruled the earth, and the few mammals that existed at the same time as the dinosaurs tended to be very small little nocturnal creatures kind of scurrying around in the underbrush. Two bones that make up the jaw joint of former creatures was incorporated into the mammalian middle ear. So one of the distinguishing features of a mammal is that there are certain bones in your inner ear. Some of the smallest bones in the human body are the anvil and the stirrup located in your inner ear, and those were parts of the jaw in earlier ancestors of ours. So here's a good example. So you can see the stirrup and the anvil of the inner ear here, these tiny little bones that are now part of the inner ear of the present day mammal, slightly different from the present day reptile, and these bones kind of came from the jaw joint of some of our ancient ancestors. So these bones kind of moved and shifted and were co-opted for a different purpose in modern day mammals. By the early Cretaceous period, the three living lineages of mammals emerged: monotremes, marsupials, and eutherians. You may have heard these words before: monotremes, marsupials, and eutherians. Mammals did not undergo a significant adaptive radiation until after the Cretaceous period. At the time of the dinosaurs were the top dogs, and mammals were just kind of scurrying around in the underbrush. But after the extinction event that wiped out most of the dinosaurs, that freed up great numbers of ecological niches, and suddenly there were like job openings everywhere, and if you were any good at all, you got yourself a new job. And so mammals began to fill in these positions left behind by the extinct dinosaurs. Let's take a look at the monotremes first. The monotremes are an interesting group. The monotremes are a small group of egg-laying mammals. There's not a lot of mammals that lay eggs. These are the only guys, the echidnas and the platypus. These guys are going to be found in New Zealand, Australia, kind of odd little creatures here. This one is an echidna, and you're probably familiar with what a platypus looks like. But they are egg-laying mammals, which is pretty unusual. These are the only ones called monotremes. The other grouping is called marsupials. You're probably more familiar with them, particularly if you've ever read about or perhaps even traveled to Australia. There are some marsupials here in the United States. So, for example, an opossum is a marsupial, but most marsupials are in Australia, in that part of the world. Opossums, kangaroos, koalas. The embryo develops within a placenta in the mother's uterus, so the baby does develop inside the mother, but it is born very early on. If this was a human child, a human birth, you would call it a very premature, preemie baby. So the marsupial is born very early in its development, and it basically crawls its way into a pouch that the mother has, usually on her ventral side, her stomach side, and it completes its embryonic development within this pouch. So it's a maternal pouch called a marsupium. And so the baby is born almost like too early, and then it continues to incubate and develop inside this pouch called the marsupium. In most of them, the pouch opens toward the head, but in some creatures, the pouch actually opens toward the rear of the body. In this creature called a bandicoot, here's a bandicoot, it opens toward the rear of the body. And that's because the bandicoot is a burrowing creature, and if the pouch opened toward the head, it would fill with dirt as he burrowed around in the soil, or she burrowed around in the soil. So here's a good example of, look how early this little opossum, this brush-tailed possum, is born, very underdeveloped, and then crawls its way into this pouch and is taking milk from the mother there, and then continues to develop inside this pouch called the marsupium. Australia is where you're going to find most of these marsupials. Australia is basically a gigantic island that has been cut off from other portions of the land for quite some time. So you have a lot of convergent evolution. In, say, North America, you would have bison and buffalo. In Africa, you had lions and zebra and all these different creatures. Well, you have the same jobs that get filled almost completely by marsupials here in Australia. So if we were to do some comparison, so there is for every kind of eutherian mammal, we're going to look at eutherians in just a moment, there is kind of an equivalent marsupial mammal. So for example, in North America we have buffalo and pronghorn antelope. They were like the major grass eaters of the plains. Well, kangaroos are kind of like the major grass eaters of the plains of Australia. They don't have, or they didn't have, buffalo and that type of thing until they were introduced. So you have marsupials that filled the roles where other types of creatures filled those roles in other places. Let's get to the last group, the eutherians. These are the placental mammals. The placental mammals would be like your dog and humans and those types of creatures. Compared with marsupials, eutherians have a more complex placenta, and the young are further developed inside the mother's body before they're born. Young eutherians complete their embryonic development within the uterus of the mother, joined to the mother by a placenta. So the baby, the developing embryo, is nourished by the mother's body through a placenta. Molecular and morphological data give conflicting dates on the diversification of eutherians. So depending on if you're looking at morphology or molecular genetic data, you get different numbers. When did eutherians start to appear on the scene? Anywhere from 100 million years to 60 million years ago. So again, this is an area that we're still studying and kind of trying to figure out the phylogeny and the timeline for eutherians. So if we want to look at the different creatures, the ancestral mammal would be back at this point. Then you have the monotremes, which would be again like your platypus, your echidna. Then you have your marsupials. And then we have the eutherians, which then branch out into a wide variety. We won't spend a lot of time looking at all these different types of eutherians, and I wouldn't expect you to know all these names, but it would be helpful to know maybe the major three categories: the monotremes, marsupials, and eutherians. So here's lots of information, which there's no way we can go through all of this, but if you want to look on your textbook, page 725, you can get kind of an overview of mammalian diversity. We're going to take a look at just a few of them. We're going to kind of focus on the primates and the various creatures leading up to humans. A couple different videos there that you can look at: bats, sea lions, wolves, all sorts of different mammals. Let's go on to the primates. That's where we're going to spend our focus. The primates would be a mammalian order that includes lemurs, tarsiers, monkeys, and apes. We are a member of the ape group, along with chimpanzees and gorillas and orangutans and bonobos. The derived characteristics of the primates: most primates have hands and feet that are well adapted for grasping or climbing or holding objects. They have flat nails, so look at your own fingernails. That's the type of nails that other primates like orangutans and chimpanzees have as well. Other derived characters include a much larger brain than most creatures and shorter jaw, forward-looking eyes close together on the face that provides good depth perception, complex social behavior, and parental care. So chimpanzees and orangutans and humans have very sort of complex social interactions and much more developed care for their young. Fully opposable thumbs in monkeys and apes. Not all of the primates have fully opposable thumbs like you and I, but the monkeys and apes do. Of the living primates that are still around, there are three main groups: the lemurs, the lorises, and the patos, the tarsiers, and then the anthropoids. And the anthropoids would be the group that we would be in, that would include the monkeys and the apes. So here's a type of lemur. He is a primate, but he's not quite as similar to us as, say, the other apes are. The oldest known anthropoid fossils, let's get to the ones that are similar to us. That would be anthropoids, monkeys, and apes. The oldest of these fossils, about 45 million years old, indicates that tarsiers are more closely related to the anthropoids than the lemurs. So we can take a look. There are some little creatures here. The tarsiers are fairly odd looking little creatures. The lemurs that maybe, if you remember, say from the cartoons, what was it, Madagascar, where the king lemur on the island they were at, that is like this guy here. And then we're going to look at the different arthropoids, which would be the monkeys and the apes. The first monkeys evolved in what we call the Old World. That would be Africa and Asia. And then in the New World, which would be South America, monkeys first appeared about 25 million years ago. New World and Old World monkeys, they kind of underwent their own evolutionary paths. They have separate adaptive radiations. They were separated by millions of years, so they kind of developed into two separate groupings. So here on the left we have a New World monkey. A New World would be South America, and an Old World monkey on the right. And again, Old World would be Africa and Asia. If you look at a New World monkey, like this spider monkey, he has what we call a prehensile tail. His tail is almost like a fifth limb or a fifth arm, and he uses it almost like another fifth arm. And he has nostrils that open to the side if you look at his nose there. An Old World monkey has a tail, but it's not really prehensile. He doesn't use it as a fifth limb or a fifth arm, and he has nostrils that open downward, you can see there. The other group of anthropoids consists of what we call the apes, and the apes would be our closest currently existing relatives. They would include gibbons, orangutans, gorillas, chimpanzees, bonobos, and humans. And apes diverged from the Old World monkeys about 20 to 25 million years ago. We have some different videos in here of gibbons, chimps, various things you can take a look at again inside the Chapter 34 notes. And then here's some pictures of various non-human apes, the anthropoids. This would include the gibbons, orangutan, bonobos, chimpanzees, and gorillas, of course. Let's take one last break right here as we talk about the primates, and we will stop right before we get to the humans and the history of humans, the creatures that led up to our current species, Homo sapiens. One last break, and then we'll get to Concept 34.8, and we'll round out this chapter.